Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about a couple things. A shout out to each and every one of you guys right now. This is our spontaneous stream, and we're going to talk about a number of different things. We're going to talk about some updates on the Snyder Cut poll that I had working and combine that with some other polls that we saw. I'm also going to talk about bias. I'm talk about bias. Very knowledgeable, very smart people sometimes find themselves in a bias, and that bias gives them a blind spot to other things they can see. And if you've ever done research, you can't have your biases affect not only the outcome, but if someone is presenting information to you, you can't have your bias or your taste or your flavor of whatever needs to be presented. You have to look at what the person is presenting to you and you listen to the information. So I've been through lectures where, or presentations where the person who's presenting is presenting some very exciting information, but their relay of that information is quite boring. I mean, they are like the bore. You want to go to sleep on them. But when you listen to what they're saying, the content, it is exceptionally exciting. And this is something you have to understand. Um, I've spoken to people who have challenged my biases. They made me, I'm so perturbed about something that, everything they say grates against my last nerve. But if you listen to what they're saying, the content of what they're saying, um, it's something you really need to hear. So biases make us overlook or sometimes not even pick up the important things. And in the entertainment industry, obviously, movies are to entertain, but at the same time, we must always look at the content of what a movie is saying. And sometimes the deeper meaning, which we actualize or realize, makes us see a movie in a different light as well. So I'm going to talk to you guys about that. And some very intelligent people sometimes fall prey to their biases, and it's okay. It may just be your personal taste in movies. But when you make a statement that is not based on your opinion, how you speak it is it's sort of taken as fact, the way how you may say something. When it's just your opinion, that's the problem I have. And so a lot of people sometimes find themselves blanketly writing off movies for moments or uh, situations the characters may have done, and they can't get over it, and they then make these sweeping statements which they implies their opinion, but it's not really an informed opinion. It's opinion based on their bias. So when you can identify what your bias is, then you can present your bias first. So if you want to really speak in such a way that people respect your opinion, the first thing to do is identify your bias. By doing so, now you can speak in the context of your bias, and so doing, you can actually have a discussion in which it is much more productive. So I always tell people my bias. My bias is I don't really like going into movies for jokes, just for jokes' sake. And I really like depth in movies, and I evaluate the content of a movie. And if there's a relatability to it and I can carry something out of it into my real life, I really appreciate those movies. So I don't believe in emotion just for emotion's sake. I believe in emotion grounded in some principle or something bigger than the person that actually stimulates or drives the movie. Um, and not every movie's like that, but even comedies, no matter what, it must have a certain direction to it. It should have a certain degree of uh, depth to it. And what I like about certain comedians, not all comedians are like this, is that certain comedians will give you an aha moment, or they will give you something which makes you think about the situation in a very reflective way and the truths of the situation. It's not just some kind of play or play on some sort of caricature or the comics. So, for instance, someone flippantly saying, that an attribute of a character, they're evaluating it and like, and you say, really? But it's a superficial attribute. It's like, okay, why does Superman need a cape to fly? Really? Why do you need a cape? You know, you don't need no cape. The cape actually works against them, right? It's cool. It's something that is interesting, but it's not deep. And if you look at comedians who really address things and make people question things, usually the comedian, a stand-up comedian especially, goes to a certain deep measure. He sometimes is flippant with some of the jokes, but the other ones make you say, but really, why? And it goes to the fabric of how we process things in society. So that's why even if I'm watching a stand-up comedy show, it can be quite interesting. And it's not because I come to laugh, it's because the person actually makes me think about my perception of the world and about also um, how I should really interact in the world. That some of these things that I do, they're not productive. All right, so let me give you guys, first of all, another thing that I'm going to say before I proceed into this video. And that other thing is, I am here doing this video today with you because of what happened last night. I'm actually very, very broken down from what I did last night. I actually have a cavity in my mouth and I haven't tended to it. A lot of times you guys see us step out of the shadows, whoever's the YouTuber, and you really think everything is going well with them, but it's just a portrayal of themselves onto the screen for you to be entertained, and also for you to kind of forget your problems, your worries. But in fact and in truth, a lot of our YouTubers and a lot of us out there that put ourselves out there, we're going through some stuff just like you. And so, case in point, last night, found myself back in the dirt, man. Watching online porn was not cool. Man, I dehydrated myself, all kinds of stuff, addiction. And today, man, you're looking at me right now. I look much better than I was looking before. I mean, I was dried out and I hurt my mouth. I ran down my body. All my joints were messed up because of this thing. And it has actually, for all those years that I've had to deal with this struggle, so you guys will understand, it's brought mostly nothing but pain to my life. I say this to each and every one of you guys to make you understand, hey, everybody goes through the same, we go through some similar struggles. And even though I am in a totally different part of the world, and you may be in a totally different part of the world, we struggle, man. But here's the thing. Hope always gives us that positive possibility of a positive outcome. That's what keeps us moving. And it's beautiful to talk about Man of Steel because the hope theme, the theme of hope, is a powerful one. We would not continue day by day to live were it not for hope. It says there's a positive outcome that is possible. Not that it's guaranteed, but that it's possible. That's what keeps us going. Our expectation for a better tomorrow. It's not guaranteed, but that's what keeps us going. Hope. And I love that the DCU trilogy highlighted that. I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about that in a minute. But first, let me get into the polls. By the way, you can always make your comments in the chat section. Feel free to do so. I will look at your chat section right now. Let me have a look at it. See what you guys are saying. And nobody's saying anything yet, but somebody liked my video. That's cool. I guess you guys are all at work. I'm going to get my tail out of here and work too. But that'll be in a minute. All right, let me get back to what I'm doing here. Let me go to screen share. Let me show you guys some stuff, right? Awesome. All right, so first things first. We came to the end of the poll. We got 869 votes. I wanted a lot more. I know some new people voted, but still, it wasn't as much as I expected. But that happens when you run polls. Let me just remove this here. So it's somewhat similar to the other poll that I did, which had more votes, clearly a lot more votes. I really tried to push this poll to get to as many people as possible. in that space of time of 7 days, but it didn't work out. And that's the way our life goes. My hope was that I would get bigger numbers. That didn't happen in reality. And that's the thing. Hope drives you to do things. But like I said before, it does not guarantee. So anyway, this is the results of the poll. 96% of the people want the Snyder Cut of Justice League. 4% want the theatrical cut. It's very similar to the numbers that you would have seen for the poll that I did before, except I have bigger numbers. In this case, it's 93% and 7% want the theatrical cut. The numbers are smaller because you got a bigger polling size. And I do think the bigger your poll goes, more of these numbers will balance off. So it was nice to see all these different people voting on the previous 2 polls. So I just want to thank everyone who voted on the 2 polls. That was awesome, guys. And I wanted to show you the results of some other polls that were finished. I know I told you about Antoine. Anton broke down what people would thought about the Snyder Cut. And so his poll, which had 1,077 votes, was quite a good size poll. It showed that 85% of the people love Zack Snyder's movie, so they would definitely watch it. And 10% said they would watch it just for curiosity. So that's 95% of the people, again, along the lines of what you would expect. 5% were either not interested or they hated Zack Snyder. So this is really cool because these polls actually give us information and data, and I'm going to collate the polls and be able to send it to Fiona Zhang so she could look at that, because it's nice to have data behind what you're doing with this movement. Show you guys some more. Matthew Driggers. Matthew Driggers also conducted a poll. This time he conducted a poll not for the Snyder Cut, but this poll was concerning Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Cut. And this poll, again, fell along the lines of the other polls. Batman v Superman, 92% of the people liked it. And 81%, as you can see there, thought it was a masterpiece. 3% disliked it, and 5% just hated it, right? Straight out hated it. So 8% to 92%, that's pretty good, again. And we had 832 votes, you can see down here. I would love to get these numbers bigger. Again, he tried to get the poll out to as many people as possible. It didn't matter if you were a Snyder Cut fan. Of course, the poll is still, like I said before, with bias. All these polls have a bias because the first set of people you would probably contact are Snyder Cut people. You try to contact them, and then you try to contact the wider people. And then the Snyder Cut people obviously would contact other Snyder Cut people, whereas the people who are not necessarily motivated to talk about this poll, they would probably not contact other people to dislike it, right? Because people tend to focus on things they like. So all these polls would be slightly biased. And I want to make this point because, again, once you can identify the bias in something, because all of these polls are not scientifically done in terms of sample size. That's the thing you got to bear in mind. However, Warner Brothers will be paying attention to these polls nonetheless and looking at these numbers, specifically the people who are voting. So they're looking at that to see. Now, these are all 7-day polls. And so what I've been discussing with Fiona Zhang and with other people is if we can get a poll that can continue indefinitely and people can just go in and give their information, that would really be more reflective of what we would get. And therefore, you can work on almost an indefinite amount of time to get that poll going. However, we know from the petition that there are a hell of a lot more people that like the Snyder Cut and actively want the Snyder Cut to happen. So these numbers, of course, are more of an inaccurate sample size of what we're looking at. There's a sizable chunk of people who definitely appreciate these films from what we see here. And that's the important thing. Even if you increase the sample size to try and accommodate everybody else, I think it only slides down. It may slide down to 70% and 30% maybe, or even more. Not 70%, sorry, about 80%. It may slide down to 80% or somewhere there for all of these polls. But I do think the majority of people want the Snyder Cut, or they liked the Ultimate Edition of Justice League. And I would argue, I think a sizable chunk of people as well, I think the majority also like the theatrical cut of Batman v Superman. They enjoyed it. So, and I have conducted polls. I've actually conducted polls online on my YouTube channel when I was looking at BVS, and I've devoted a lot of time, as you can see, to the DCEU movies. You know, a lot of my videos are on that, on my Christ I Am Disciple channel. And what you have to understand is that that I am a Christian, right? I profess to be, and yet I have shortcomings. But I focus on these movies a lot because I see the Christian attributes in them, which leads me to Psalms 37. It says, "Fret not yourself because of evildoers, neither be envious against the workers of iniquity. For they shall soon be cut down like grass and wither as the green herb." And this scripture to me is beautiful because it gives me the hope that I can annihilate my enemies. You know, my fornicating habits. I don't think always of my enemies as, you know, separate from myself like another human being. Sometimes I see my enemies as internal qualities and attributes that are going to destroy me and destroy those around me. So Psalms 37 to me is an internal reflective look at my struggle. And so I speak this to you guys. So I want you guys to understand biases also can be, you know, negative things, negative attributes. It's good to have a bias towards, say, for instance, goodness and stuff. But, you know, when you have an ignorant bias or a bias that causes you a blind spot to things which could be productive and good, it's not necessarily a good thing. If you can acknowledge these things and you can acknowledge your bias, it will help other people in the end. And it gives you also a much more objective sort of way of looking, because now I'm saying I set my bias aside. I understand I have a bias. Let me tell you what I think from my bias perspective. And I'm going to set that aside. And now I'm going to give you an objective look at what I think. I think that's the best way to go about doing things. I know on social media, people, because of anonymity or just the fact that they are free to express themselves without other people interrupting them like that, they are much more raw on social media. Whereas if I was to meet the person and talk to them face to face in real life, while they will still have their dogmas, they don't really show it as strongly as they would on social media, because social media basically gets us to share our thoughts on things. And we can be very vicious about somebody who has a different opinion to us. And I've also been prey to that. I have also been someone who has done that. So I'm not saying I'm a perfect person. And I definitely am saying that we really need to work on how we interface with each other on social media. Currently, Matthew Driggers, he's also running a poll on Man of Steel. And he's got 928 votes so far. He's got 5 more days left. You guys can join in and put in your piece on Man of Steel. Currently, Man of Steel is not considered a masterpiece by 66% of the people. 25% liked it. I voted that I liked it. I didn't think it was a masterpiece either. And 8% disliked it. 1% said heresy. So again, you're looking at overall 91% of the people actually liked the movie and 9% didn't like it. So these figures seem to be reflective over and over again. I think most of the time people, when they talk about masterpiece, I don't know what they mean by it. But for me, a masterpiece of a movie is one that will stand up to other masterpieces of filmmaking. We're talking films like, you know, Stanley Kubrick's 2001. Odyssey, Space Odyssey, you know, that kind of thing. That's what I talk. When I talk about masterpiece, I'm not talking about a movie I love. I can love a movie and it's not a masterpiece. You know, Man of Steel, I loved it. I watched it 6 times, but I don't think of it as a masterpiece, you know, of filmmaking. BVS, on the other hand, is a masterpiece of filmmaking. That's just how I feel about it. You know, I don't think of Wonder Woman as a masterpiece. I don't think of, definitely don't think of Suicide Squad as a masterpiece. Nor Justice League. But when it comes to that status, you say masterpiece, you know, there are very few, in my opinion, movies that can get that status. So I don't care how much you do at a box office. Masterpiece means that the director took his time and actually gave you a story that not only pushes the boundaries on what you know, but also it's something that is so very, when you reflect on it and you look at it, you get more stuff. You keep on coming back to it over and over again. You know, Stanley Kubrick's 2001 is revolutionary. It changed everything. about how we look at space, time, all that. And you know, it's a masterpiece of filmmaking. I can think of another a movie that's masterpiece. It's for me, The Matrix is a masterpiece of filmmaking because it talks about philosophy, it talks about how we question our world, it talks about a number of different things, and it's also tied into comic book movies at the same time. That's a masterpiece of filmmaking. I don't care what anybody says. And I think the trilogy was a fantastic piece of filmmaking as well. I've heard people use the title pretentious for the Matrix trilogy, but again, it provokes them to say that because of their ineptitude or their, I think people sometimes feel intimidated by a certain set of a franchise or a movie, or they just feel that the thing didn't do what they wanted it to do and go down the usual tropes, and you know, and because of that they criticize it. But really, when you look at the Matrix or the Matrix trilogy, it is quite a piece of work. Okay. And again, you can spend a lot of time reflecting on these movies. As an intellectual, that's a fantastic thing for me. So yeah, you can go ahead and check out Madrigals, but again, you see the pattern. It's the same thing. Let's look at some others here. Oh, so I'm going to go into what I was talking about concerning bias. Okay, I'm going to look at what this tweet here was a very interesting one. A good Joe, he's a guy who's out there on social media. He said, "I will never understand how a group of critics saw Man of Steel on the big screen and walked out and said, yeah, that wasn't a good Superman film at all." And the guy who I'm going to speak about concerning bias is Just Reggie. Just Reggie says, and this is actually on Twitter right now, he said, okay, I love Man of Steel and consider it to be good, if not great. It doesn't have a clear third act structure, and Pa Kent was absolutely awful. He was so misrepresented that I literally was seething in my seat in the theater. And I thought this is an interesting way of illustrating to you guys how much bias dictates how a person thinks. Because I'm not trying to put Just Reggie on blast. He's a very, very intelligent person, etc. But I'm using it as an example to show you that when you challenge that bias, how the person reacts. So first of all, this is Just Reggie. He didn't like that, of course, Jonathan Kent died. He calls him Pa Kent, showing his bias, you know, not calling him Jonathan Kent at all. And the other interesting thing is that he's going to give his reasons for why he thinks that Jonathan Kent was absolutely awful. And I'm going to respond to him. I'm not going to use the other guys who are just kind of taunting him and stuff for his point of view. So, Just Reggie, he says, Superman gets his character from Pa Kent. You don't get a resolutely good Superman from a morally relativistic father. Pa Kent is a good guy, and that's canon. And I thought this is very interesting because we're going to explore that, what he just said, right now. We're going to actually challenge that. The thing he's saying is that Pa Kent, his morality is relative. So let's get to it. Let's get to it. His comments. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my response to his comment here that challenges his comment pretty much. And you know what? I should have. Oh, I can still do that. Oh, maybe not. Let me hold on a second. So, all right. So I'm going to show you guys. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to show you his comment, and this is my reply to it. So here he is. He's saying that Pa Kent was absolutely awful, and this is what I had to say to him. I said, that makes no sense. Superman's core is Pa Kent, man. You can't call the film great without the Pa Kent story. Can I keep, and I quote from the story, can I keep pretending I'm your son? You are my son, Jonathan Kent says. Powerful. Are you kidding me, man? I don't think there's any other comments. There's just all this trash talking going on. And so I wanted to show him that, you know, the central focus of Man of Steel was Jonathan Kent. And, you know, Man of Steel can't be a good movie without Jonathan Kent. It's basically Superman is basically he is the product of Jonathan Kent, his humanity, his personality, etc. So moving on a little bit here, he then responds. He says Superman gets his character from Pa Kent. You don't get a resolutely good Superman from a morally relativistic father. And so Pa Kent is a good guy, and that's canon. So I challenged that. I challenged him in that saying. And I said to him, so this Pa Kent wasn't a good person? When you did see Jonathan Kent do something bad, to say, when did you see Jonathan Kent do something bad to say he wasn't good? Remember the talk on restraint he had with Clark when he was bullied? If you're going to, if you're going on that one moment when he said maybe because he's trying to protect his son, then are you realistic? I'm just going to show you the rest of the replies here. He goes on to say, I like this little thread here. He says, a complete misunderstanding of human nature and the character. The quality that most delineates Supes from any other hero is his character. He's not propelled into heroism by tragedy. He just wants to use his ability to help people. In 80 years of comics canon, it comes from Pa. And I said, and that is what you saw in Man of Steel. Clark can't help but help people. The school bus, the oil rig, the bar scene. And Zach shows it comes from his father, who was helping people when he dies from the tornado. So it wasn't a disaster that made Clark that way. It was Martha and Jonathan, right? Again, I'm pointing out to him because he can't get past his bias of what Jonathan Kent said about maybe, and also that Jonathan Kent sacrificed his life. He didn't want Clark to save him. He can't get past that. And so he's ignored the rest of the attributes of Jonathan Kent and the bigger picture of what Jonathan Kent represented. So he goes on to say, Pa Kent's actions said that his life is less than valuable than a family's pet, that would be the dog, and his son realizing his inevitable heroic destiny, all of which is unnecessary, nonsensical deviation from 80 years of mythos. Man of Steel is significantly better than Donner films, in my opinion. Nice try, though. So he's saying to me that Pa Kent's actions when he went to save the dog, he showed that the dog's life was more important than his, that the dog escaped and he saved that life, but he didn't want Clark to save his life. And I thought that was very interesting that he would come with that attribute, that he thinks that the life of dog was the focus of, Pa Kent's actions, that, he didn't value his life. And that's further from the truth. So I said, how? He saved the dog, but acted to protect Clark from the onslaught of the world and government so he could become the beacon of hope. Jonathan, through faith, actually believed in something bigger than himself. He didn't die for a dog, dude. He died so his son could live to give hope. In other words, Jonathan Kent, as I'll show you later on, he knew what the stakes were. If Jonathan Kent would allow Clark to save him in a heartbeat because he knows he's capable of doing that. But his problem, his setback, this is why he even went to save those people and save the dog. He didn't want Clark going to do that, was because he's trying to protect his son. If his son acts and people see openly that the son has these gifts, now the son becomes the focus of everything. And his son would now be under scrutiny, not only from the people in his village who don't have a overt way of seeing that, but also he would be under scrutiny from the government. And as he said to his son, which we'll go into just now, people hate what they don't understand, right? So this moment here is not about Jonathan Kent not valuing his life over a dog. This is actually about Jonathan Kent realizing there's something bigger than his life at stake, and he needs to protect it. And it's his son's potential, the hope of his son, becoming something greater that could help the world. So he sacrificed himself to ensure his son had the best chance of becoming that. Ironically, I respond to him, Clark was discussing with him about him not being his dad, but someone who found him in a field. So Clark didn't even acknowledge him as a father just moments before, only to see his dad sacrifice himself so that he could find himself in peace before revealing himself to the world, which would in part reject him. We hear him yell, "Dad," to his father. So the irony of the situation is that he really embraces his father as his father sacrifices his life so that he would have a chance to bless the world. It's these sort of deeper meanings to things that really give a deeper meaning to hope, that this man was willing to sacrifice his life so that his son, all right, would have hope. So he comes out to answer me on that. And he says, well, I was responding to another guy. And he says, there's a way to portray that sentiment that still retains the essence of the character. It doesn't even propel him into being a public Superman. Zod does. And this showed, again, his misunderstanding. And so he's saying Zod caused Superman to come out to the public. That's not the point. And I'll show you what I mean. So, for instance, he says that I say, wow, he doesn't. You're the answer, son. You're the answer to why we're alone in the universe. I'm quoting. It would be a broken burden for anyone to bear, but I have to believe you're not just anyone, Clark. You were sent here for a reason. All these changes you're going through, one day, you'll think of it as a blessing. And when that day comes, you're going to have to make a choice of whether to stand proud before the earth or the human race or not. Somewhere out there, you have another father who gave you another name. And he sent you here for a reason, Clark. And even if it takes the rest of your life, you owe it to yourself to find out what that reason is. And what I'm saying to him is, he said that Jonathan should have been portrayed another way. And he says it doesn't even propel Superman to being a public Superman. And that's not true at all. In fact, I'll continue just so you can see what I'm saying. Just here. I said here, I say you owe it to yourself to find out what that reason is. That sounds to me like the reason Clark became Superman. He listened to his father and set on a quest to find out who he was with the command key Jonathan gave him. So I think you're completely wrong about Zod causing Clark to be Supes or even to come out as Supes. This was set in motion years before, when Clark was a young boy. Jonathan set him on the path to becoming Superman. So absolutely, Jonathan Kent is critical to Clark becoming Superman. So he goes on to say, it doesn't work. They only serve as platitudes. His actions say, hide your gifts at all cost. And while I've already agreed that this is good to great film, here I am arguing about its flaws. It's imperfect. I am still a solid Zack Snyder fan and Majesty fan. Don't get my criticism to distort it. I said, again, you misunderstand Jonathan Kent. He never said hide your gifts. And that's the thing that he's picking up because of his bias. He's picking up that Jonathan Kent is saying hide your gifts. He's not saying that. He said be discreet with them and find out who you are and your purpose. Clearly, we see Clark use his gifts while Jonathan is alive and after he died. So it wasn't about using them or not using them when he wouldn't have. And Lewis wouldn't have tracked him. In other words, Jonathan Kent was saying be discreet. He said, I don't want the world to know about the other side of yourself. If you can help people, go ahead and help them, but don't just do it in an obvious way. So when Clark said, so I should have just let them die, he was like, maybe. He wasn't saying that's the answer. He was saying that's possible. Maybe that's an option you should have looked at. And the point behind it was that he's not saying don't save people. He's saying if you're going to go about using your gifts, make sure you're covered. Do it in secrecy. Because if you look, as I said before, if you look at what Clark did, he was saving people when Jonathan was there. He was saving people when Jonathan died. He saved the oil rig workers. He saved the woman who was going to be bullied or, taken a bit, sexually abused, harassed. Sorry. You saw him saving a lot of people in the movie, but he was always anonymous. He would be there and then he'd disappear, right? He understood he had to be discreet in how he saved people, but it wasn't going to stop him from saving people. And that's the point that Jonathan Kent was making, which he took to heart. In fact, Jonathan Kent paid the ultimate price so that Superman would be able to learn who he was. And then we continue as we see Jonathan's telling him, you need to know who you are and what your purpose is here. And when you know that, then you can make a choice as to what you're going to do. So he was asking him to be discreet in how he was carrying about himself. And I just added, Jonathan saw that Clark was a wonderful gift to the world. He wanted the world to see that, according to Martha Kent. You remember she said, "Oh, you're beautiful," to Clark while she was sitting on the steps. We want the whole world to see that, right? It's not that they don't want the world to see the beauty of him, but they don't want the world to not see the beauty of him. So they're protecting him. Just imagine if they were so stupid as to let Clark do what he was doing all over the world, and then the government comes down, because the government didn't come down and find him, and the government now, just like in X-Men movies, they can start to run tests on him and they try to capture him, and people in the world are vitriolic to him. They think of him as a villain constantly because they're afraid of him. I mean, that's just craziness. I mean, in the real world, if somebody like that pops up on the scene, immediately we don't know if they're good or evil. We're going to think of them as having evil intent because they're big and strong. You know what I'm saying? And the news will broadcast them like that. So he wanted the world to see that, according to Martha Kent, and he saw his potential from a child. But in order for the world to see it, he had to be protected and know his purpose, who he was. Discretion was needed. That's what's real about this movie. And apparently this guy can't see that because he's so locked up in his bias that this is Pa Kent, not Jonathan Kent, Pa Kent. And, you know, he overtly says values and so on to Clark. Whereas when you look at Jonathan Kent in this movie, he actually lets Clark choose the right way or the right values through consequence. Like when he was being bullied, when they were out by the guy who's fixing cars and stuff, and the guy bullied him, and Clark was saying, "Man, I wanted to hit that kid so bad." What did Jonathan Kent say? "And then what? Whatever man you come to be, my son, whether good or bad, he's going to change the world." He put that responsibility on him. He let him have that burden of responsibility. You have to be wise in what you're doing, but he doesn't make him choose that. He does it in a very loving, fatherly way. He's making him make choices continuously, teaching him how to choose the right path. Even though he doesn't know, Jonathan Kent, exactly what Clark will turn out to be, he's trying to teach him values, and he's demonstrating it. He's showing it. And he's being honest with him and transparent. He said, "You know what? A part of me wanted to see you hit that boy too. But then what?" Beautiful. Beautiful. Look, man, no Pa Kent in the history of Superman ever went that way. Even the Pa Kent from Smallville didn't go that way. And by the way, the Pa Kent from Smallville almost killed a guy to stop him from revealing Superman's secret. So, I mean, you got to ask yourself if this is not much more well thought out, Jonathan Kent, and that you're really shortchanging yourself by your bias. Let me move back a bit. Back to the discussion. So the next thing, okay, hold on a second. So the next thing he does, he proceeds to do, is he starts to use canon. He starts to use the comics. This guy here is speaking about Pa Kent in Smallville, because I do believe the Pa Kent that we got was off of Smallville. But anyway, let's move. Just Reggie then says he uses comics now, mentioning Smallville as a source material, and I am nostalgic. I don't think he gets it. The point being that Smallville was a television series that portrayed Pa Kent as not a perfect individual. He had flaws in him, and that people lapped it up. Okay. So anyway, as far as fanboys go, while I want the Snyder Cut as much as anyone, I'm a bigger fan of Supes than Zack Snyder. And his contextualization of Superman was great. Pa Kent, nah. So he said he's a bigger fan of Superman than Zack Snyder is. Okay, if you say so. Comparing now, like Willis Lane says, "Oh, so we're comparing dicks now?" And that's what I saw him doing. And he uses this comic here. And it's ironic because the very comic points to the core of Pa Kent. So this is what happened. Within a week, Ma passed away, and Dad lays on his deathbed. "Dad, oh, Dad, I'm so sorry," says Clark. Don't torture yourself, son. You did everything you could. Clark, I have to talk to you before it's too late. You've got to go on, son. You have to keep on using your tremendous gifts for good. You're Superman now. You can do even greater things for the world. Oh, yeah, I'm Superman, all right. I've saved millions over the earth, but now the people I love most in the world are slipping away from me, and I can't do a thing to stop it. Please, son, don't, in the name of God. What kind of Superman is that? Please, son, don't. This is challenging Superman's hope, you see. He says, Dad, don't leave me, please. Not again. Oh, God, not. Okay. And I found this wonderful because this here is Superman. And here, listen to what Pa Kent was said to him. Pa Kent wanted him to let go of trying to save him through this old time and hold on to what he is becoming. Now, interestingly enough, Clark here is already Superman. And in losing his father, he has to now separate having to lose his father and that he can't save him to embrace what he can do for the world. And this is a beautiful topic here, speaking about hope again, where we have to focus our attention on what we can do, and what we cannot do, we have to just let it go. But more importantly, Pa Kent sees the bigger picture here. And it's the bigger picture that Pa Kent tries to keep Superman focused on. And pretty much that is exactly the same thing going on here in Man of Steel, which Just Reggie just cannot see. And it's because of his bias. And so he says, mentioning so as far as fanboys go, while I want the Snyder Cut, I'm a bigger fan of, yes, his contextualization of Superman is great. Pa Kent, nah. And he cites this example. And it's so funny because to me, this is my response so he can understand. So I say to him, you get Superman more than Zach, I guess. You so get it. You misquote Jonathan in The Man of Steel, then speak about quitters. Okay, that's what I wanted to do. I'm trying to actually find. This is so interesting. I had to respond to that. I had a response right here, and somehow doesn't it doesn't render that. I can't tell you why it doesn't, but it doesn't. So what I'm gonna do is so weird. So I'm just gonna go back here. Twitter is an interesting thing. It can it does whatever the heck it wants to do, I guess. That's just the way how these things go. Let me try again. Okay. I guess it's not going to let me do that. Okay, well, whatever. So here's his second example where he says, which one of these is not like the others? And he speaks now about Pa Kent. He says, besides, what did I always teach you? Nobody knows what the future holds, but the important thing is to face it with courage and your head held high, because Kents aren't quitters. That's gotten me through a lot over the years. Thanks, Pa. Anytime. And then he shows this one, which says, don't save me, son. People hate kids who save their fathers from tornadoes, which is very fickle. That's not what he said. And then in this one, in the final moments, Dad Kent remains conscious briefly. Son, you did your best for us. Now listen to my last words. You must always use your superpowers to do good, uphold law and order. Good luck, my son. Goodbye. Goodbye, Dad. So this is very straightforward, okay? This is like literally, there's no nuance there and anything. It's just got straightforward, right? But the important thing here is that, again, Jonathan Kent wants Clark to use his gifts to bless the world. In this one, of course, Clark is a Superman here. And here again, Clark is Superman, and he's saying Kent's never quit. Now, what he seems to continuously miss this, is that none of the times there is Superman ever quitting or Jonathan Kent. In fact, Jonathan Kent so boldly believes what he believes that he's willing to sacrifice his life. And so I laugh and I say, you get Superman more than Zach, I guess. So you get it. You misquote Jonathan in Man of Steel and then speak about quitters when no one ever quitted. That's your impression of the scene where Jonathan actually tries to protect Clark's identity, laying down his life so his son would be safe. Smallville's Jonathan Kent also went through great lengths to protect his son's identity by being ready to kill someone to preserve it. That's extreme, man. I guess W got him wrong too. I guess you don't like that version of Pa Kent. He mentioned Smallville too to show that Zach got Pa Kent right. Your comic you showed has a parallel to Man of Steel. Pa Kent also wanted Clark to let go of trying to save him so that he could accomplish something greater. And that's in Man of Steel. So when you saw Pa Kent, trying to get Clark to let go in that scene above that comic, it's the same thing in Man of Steel, except in this case, Pa Kent or Jonathan Kent, he puts his hand up to Clark and says, "Don't try to save me, son." All right? He's a little bit more active in that. But it's the same thing with the dying Jonathan Kent who's saying, "Let it go, son. You can't, don't try to save me. You have something bigger to do." And Clark is just angst that he can't save his father. In the comic, it's the same parallel, but because he's overcome with bias, he cannot see it. So I continue onwards. So Pa Kent also wanted Clark to let go of trying to save him so that he can accomplish something greater. While Clark is already Superman in those above comics that he shows, Jonathan sees something great in his own life in him. So Clark was already Superman in the above. In the Man of Steel movie, he's not Superman. He's becoming Superman. And so that's why Jonathan's sacrifice is even greater, because he is looking in hope, which is what is highlighted here, about the potential of this young man being someone who is good for the world, a gift to it. He doesn't know what will happen, but he's so convicted in that hope, he's willing to sacrifice his life. That's tremendous. That's not something that's terrible. That's tremendous. I didn't tell him. Zach truly gets Superman and Pa Kent, but you're so busy focusing on the scene where Jonathan says maybe. You can't see he's working towards the potential of Clark he saw as a child being fully actualized. Whoever that man is, good or bad, he's going to change the world. That's what Jonathan Kent said to Superman. So again, I think sometimes biases, like Reggie's bias, for instance, gives him a blind spot to what the character actually represents and how it's so much of a core of what Superman is. Okay, let me see if I can move on here. Yes. There's a lot more in this discussion. I'm hoping I can get to it. Okay. So then he goes on to say there's a way to portray that sentiment that still retains the essence of the character. It doesn't even, okay, we dealt with that already, okay? There's one more thing I wanted to say. I think it comes right here. So he says it doesn't, okay, it doesn't serve, it only serves as platitudes. It doesn't work. It only serves as platitudes. Actually say hide your gift at all costs. While I'm already, okay, we talked about that, right? And I gave him another answer to that, actually. Okay. I explained to him, because he's trying to point out, he says he's pointing out flaws. I said it isn't a flaw, it's your bias. And sadly, the thing which makes Superman who he is as a human is what you're calling a flaw. That's what blows my mind. It means you still must understand the Superman Zack Snyder is showing you because you couldn't overcome your bias. Sad. He says Superman and Man of Steel is the most comic accurate depiction in live action TV or film ever. Pa Kent is an utter distortion. That's amazing. Somebody to say that. He's the most comic book accurate character. But he's only that character because of Pa Kent. That's what I don't understand. What makes Superman human is his upbringing by two loving Kansas farmers. Dunham missed it by a mile. I don't understand how this guy can't see that. I said, why are you making over simplistic arguments to validate your bias? You choose to think this way because I know you clearly see the deeper meaning. Platitudes, please. Let's have a serious discussion, shall we? And again, the fact that he's saying that, how can Superman be the most comic book accurate character if his values clearly are imbued by Martha and Jonathan Kent? He was raised by them. He was not raised by Kal-El. He was not raised by Laura Vaughn. So clearly, if you're saying he's the most comic book accurate Superman, the credit for that goes to Martha and Jonathan Kent. There's nobody else. And clearly, the film highlights Jonathan more than Martha. Martha was there to kind of protect him and make sure that he could focus in on his abilities. Jonathan, clearly, Superman is patterned after Jonathan's character. Clearly. In fact, I go on to say that in BVS, Superman's end is as a result of Jonathan's action before sacrificing his life for something bigger. That's what happened in BVS at the end. Superman sacrificed his life for something bigger. That's the whole point. And it's not just something bigger, it's hope that you can give the earth a chance, or people, or the world, or human beings the chance, the chance to be able to have a good life and to be better. That's the whole point behind Jonathan Kent's action and Superman's action at the end of Batman v Superman. In fact, the whole reason Superman starts to engage General Zod and fight him is for that very reason, that humanity can go on, because they were about to be annihilated by General Zod. This is not rocket science. But for some reason, this guy has a blind spot and he cannot see past the maybe that Jonathan Kent said, as well as the fact that Jonathan Kent literally followed up on that maybe and sacrificed his life so that Superman could have a chance to be able to develop. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a Superman. And it's so, to me, realistic of our world, and how when people are exceptional and different to other people, they misjudge them because they're afraid of them, and they literally start ripping people to shreds. And you saw it with the Man of Steel film. The critics looked at that film and trashed it to shreds because it wasn't like any other comic book movie. And so they said Zack Snyder doesn't know how to direct films because it didn't go like how a MCU movie goes, or the typical comic book movies of the time. The thing is visionary, but yet, for some reason, people trash it. This is exactly what Zack is saying. This is exactly what Nolan is saying, what David Goyer is saying. And literally, it's proven to be true, and it is reality. Literally, people are behaving this way. And it's literally, Just Reggie is literally misunderstanding the movie. And he's literally hating what he doesn't understand. He's literally doing that right now. I mean, how much more do you need to see the point of the movie is true? It's literally happening before us. And my point being, biases prevent us from seeing objective truth, and biases make us hate things we don't understand. Reggie literally misses the boat on why Superman is a great film. The Superman in this movie, we've said it 100 million times, is not Kal-El, it's not Clark Kent, it's Jonathan Kent who's Superman. And literally, we see Jonathan run into a tornado to prevent his son from doing something supernatural with his gifts and save people and their babies, and then he goes back and he saves a dog. He does that because he's trying to protect his son. And literally, we see where the son gets his habit of helping people. Just imagine if Kal-El came to Earth and was with a family as villainous as Lex Luthor's family. He would not have those attributes. He would not end up being that person. It's Jonathan Kent, it's Martha Kent who made him that person who cares, putting middle American values in him. Now, Jor-El took a risk to send him to Earth. He didn't know who was going to take him and raise him, but it just so happened that it was good people who took him and raised him. It is no way in God's green earth you can tell me these people are shooting it as they go along. He told Clark, he said, you know what? Maybe we're not good enough for you, son, but we're trying to shoot this thing along the best way we know how. They had to protect the kid when he was a child from playing with other kids, for not because of fear that he would damage them, but because they were protecting his development. He, as a child, was struggling to breathe, Martha Kent said. He was struggling as he grew up, but the loving, caring nature of his parents is what kept him centered. He went to school with other children, but his parents carefully navigated it. That's real talk. That ain't no fiction. I'm amazed that these people who are locked up in their fantasy worlds expected Jonathan Kent to say, well, son, we're not quitters. No, he's not going to tell his son he's not a quitter. He's going to show his son he's not a quitter. He's going to show his son what is holding back on your powers. Because the powerful thing about Superman is that Superman has control over himself, not to just go berserk with his powers on anything. And he's not an impetuous person. He's not somebody who just given to emotion and says anything he wants to do and does anything he wants. He has to be reserved around humanity. He had to learn self-control. And this movie is powerful because it shows us this is where he learned it, from his parents. I'm amazed that this guy would say something like that. It blows my mind. And Jonathan Kent was such a convicted person, he was willing to die for what he believed, putting in those values into Clark, but making him choose the values, not forcing them upon him and saying, oh, we're not quitters, and put his hand on his hips and say, we're not quitters, Clark. No, he let him think it through, because he understood the power and that Clark needed to learn how to choose the right thing to do. The world in Man of Steel is our world. It's not a fantasy fictional world where everything's happy and gay and people just laugh. No, this is what our world is. It's mean, it's dirty, it's low. But it's also got those moments of brilliance and love and kindness. It's balanced. There are good people, there are evil people, and the people in between. I just told you guys my flaw. That the guy talking to you guys, he has problems with his own life. That's real. So I continuously do not understand why people connect fantasy with reality. I just can't get it. To me, it makes no sense. This is a realistic film, but yet you want somehow to force the director and force the writer and force the person who also conjured up the story, Christopher Nolan. You want to force in your narrative in there that does not fit into what a real scenario is in a real world. Oh, he's a quitter because, he just let his father die. Really? Really? Like really? True? So that's what he is, a quitter? That's what we call people, losers and quitters, because they use self-restraint? Because it's something bigger that's at hand? Which the comics you just illustrated show that Jonathan Kent always looked at the bigger picture? Really? Really? I mean, this is the kind of thing we have to deal with. Very intelligent people. I am victim to that. I can do those things. Maybe I don't like how a character is depicted. It doesn't mean that character is not depicted correctly. Let me see what you guys are saying in the comment section. Jacob Brazina, hello there. Shout out to you, Jacob. Zubir Aziz, hi there, Zack Snyder fans. Shout out to you, Zubir. Giovanni Deodario, don't stop believing. Giovanni Deodario says Ben is on the rehab. The Batman movie is fading away like dust. Giovanni Deodario says, great stream, bro. Thank you for all of you participating in the stream at this present point in time. I know you guys are all busy with your day, but my point being that I feel like some people, because of their biases, and I am guilty of it too, we are shortchanged. We shortchange ourselves of the bigger picture and the brilliance, the wonder, the take-home messages in these films. clearly Jonathan Kent, and we see Clark even go and visit Jonathan Kent at the end of Man of Steel and talk about, man, I wish he could have seen what happened. And then Martha tells him he did see it. And we see that flashback with him as a child, and Jonathan seeing that potential in him, that he saw it. That's why he cultivated it. He saw what Clark would be. And it's so amazing that through the eyes of hope and faith, we see that in a movie. That's never happened in any comic book movie before. And if you've watched X-Men, you would know that the world was very, very skeptical about superheroes, people with special abilities. What's to make that different in our world? And so I'm kind of surprised that he, again, doesn't get the caution that Jonathan Kent needs to take. In addition, and I pointed this out already, I can't find it on the feed, but in addition, his very simplistic way of thinking of Jonathan Kent as someone who doesn't want Clark Kent to do good is just amazing to me. He's never said that. He's saying what you have to do is be wise and discreet in how you conduct yourself, son. You gotta stay under the radar. And so to me, it's just amazing that he would say an absolute statement like that and interpret what Jonathan Kent said about maybe, it's maybe, by the way, to say that these are all possibilities. One thing about Jonathan Kent you will notice in his statements, he says, whatever person you become, that man, good or bad, will change the world. He never, ever absolutely stays on one statement. He's letting Clark choose every way forward, but his actions denote that he's trying to create a character in Clark that's a good person, a wholesome person. But since he doesn't know what the future brings, he says he includes both sides. Similarly, when he was there with Clark and he said, maybe, should I let those people die? He says, maybe. Maybe includes good and bad. In other words, I don't know the answer, son. But what I do know is you have to be more discreet to protect yourself. Because the one beautiful thing about Jonathan Kent that I love in this movie is the fact that he and Martha do not know exactly what the future brings. They're not prophets. Hollywood tends to give these absolutes. I love that in the beginning of Batman v Superman, we hear about diamond absolutes. They give these absolutes. What absolutes do sometimes to people is when you lock off things in absolutes and you don't know what the future brings, you literally can set yourself up to become the opposite of what you're aspiring to be. So if you say, son, you need to be a good person, you must be a good person every day, that doesn't help the child. And we, the Kents, we're good people. We're not quitters, right? It doesn't help anything, because what it could eventually happen is Clark could actually become a bad person because of that. Because his diamond absolute is shattered. That's what happened with Batman. That's what happened with Bruce Wayne. His diamond absolute was shattered. And so when you have diamond absolutes like that, where there are no exceptions, no, this must happen, which is what this guy has. His bias is a diamond absolute, which will never work in this world if you're a really good parent. You allow your children to choose the right path. And you let them be exposed to certain scenarios, but your actions, by your behavior and your actions, you show them the way. And this is what was lacking. And this is what this guy doesn't get. And a lot of people I've noticed in watching movies, especially the critics, they always are looking for verbal cues. They look for verbal cues for comedy. They look for verbal cues for this, that. And Zack Snyder doesn't always give you a verbal cue. He wants you to see what's happening. And that's the thing that people call him a visual director for, when he's actually a beautiful director with great emotion, great, really true, valuable, meaningful pathos, which is what the MCU is short of. They do pathos geared on dialogue, and then they try to have the actors dramatize the pathos, which is absolutely empty. When you look at it, it doesn't feel with any weight. It makes you manipulate your emotions for a minute, but then they flip it back into comedy and they go straight into some scene that is fantastical, so that it's not realistically grounded as much as they want to claim. Even the Winter Soldier was not realistically grounded, but a beautiful film that really worked on the pathos and really developed it was Captain America, the First Avenger. They really took their time to put a layer of substance below the pathos, to identify why he was beautiful, to identify why he was different. And I love the paradox that when he didn't even have that body, this is who he was. When he got the body that made him Captain America, he was still the same. And it's the integral essence of a person. Now, the only problem is Captain America has not evolved since that time in terms of his character. He has not. And so that's what makes these other Captain America sequels so less to me than the first movie that was launched out by Paramount. But Superman has evolved. He's been challenged. His hope that he aspires to, and the hope that he adopted from his both fathers, Jor-El and also from Jonathan, it had been challenged. And now he had to find within himself that generation of hope. That's an evolution of the character. You see? And that's the thing that lacks in the MCU. A lot of the characters, I think only Tony Stark is a character that evolved some. And even when you look at his character's evolution, it's very superficial again. And they use theatrics. They use his fast talking. They use the fact that he's so flawed to get you to get roped into him. But when we talk about character development, as much as the character is developing and you see him getting that aha, eureka moment throughout, the different films he's been through, you would find that it's not still fundamentally built on some core principle. It's an aha moment. Okay, I need to be better, which he had in the very first Iron Man. But at the same time, he doesn't embrace a different philosophy. And so he goes back and makes the same mistake again. He's just embracing the moment. Oh, yeah, well, no, I mustn't do that anymore. It's not embracing the philosophy. And that's the difference. When you have a core philosophical different view of things, like how Bruce Wayne started to view Superman as a man, as a human. That's a core philosophical. He was xenophobic, and now he's not. That's a core principle attribute. That's a shift in how he sees the world, his philosophy of the world. And so these are the things we're talking about. You don't see that in the MCU, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. You can always challenge it and tell me that I'm wrong. I don't have a problem with that because I want to grow as a person. But as far as I can see, that's what I see. I could be wrong. I am willing to listen to someone convince me otherwise. And that's the thing that I think is lacking. We have people emotionally attached to certain characters and therefore emotionally blurting out their bias without their mind is clouded. They're not really thinking logically. They're not listening. They're just spouting out how they feel. And that's not a substantive reason to make a statement or an opinion on a particular character. I just don't believe that. I think you should have something solid, not just emotional. How this guy makes me feel and how that makes me feel. And that's the problem in society today. People are going off of feelings a lot of times, and they're not using the higher levels of their cognition to really evaluate situations and look at what really is happening. If you don't give me what I want, then I'm going to throw a tantrum. That's what you're getting over and over by professional people in the industry, and that's sad. So I wanted to just talk about that, the bias that goes on, and even the hate for Zack Snyder and the release of Snyder Cut movement, where you have people who speak about rehire James Gunn, not understanding the fundamental similarities between both movements, and even the reason why the release of Snyder Cut movement sparked the rehire James Gunn movement. It's so sad to see people. I see people pick sides and based off of emotion. Oh yeah, Marvel got what they deserve. So therefore, James Gunn released the James Gunn movement is nonsense because he committed this heinous act in the past, so we can't give him a pass. See, the only rapist in the MCU, and that's not what it is. You're totally misunderstanding and misconstruing it based on your bias. No, rehire James Gunn is a good movement. It's solid. Maybe not as possible as release the Snyder Cut movement, but who knows? That's just my opinion. The point is, they're both about directors who have been relieved from their duty. And I do believe Disney doesn't have the right reason for removing James Gunn. That's just my suspicion. To cover up something else. And I think it has to do with artistic and creative integrity at the end of the day. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. You can always leave your comments below. I just wanted to give you an update on what the Release the Snyder Cut movement is looking like, the polls and stuff, as well as to encourage you to move away from not only your biases, but also the negative things that you may do in your life that are destructive. And I'm hoping that these videos reach to something deeper. The only reason I try to entertain you guys with these movies, and you'll notice I'm always very serious about them, more or less, is because I think that there's something there for each and every one of us to actually carry with us in our daily lives. And as a Christian, I think it's very important to hold on to that hope that there will be a better day. That's the thing that drives me on, was in spite of all the things, the stupid things sometimes I do, etc. Giovanni De Adario, Zubar Aziz, and Jacob Brazina. I wish you guys a great day. Have a good one.